The meadow was damp with morning mist, the air heavy with the scent of wet grass and river water. Hooves pressed into the soft soil, leaving deep impressions that filled slowly with moisture. The River Thames moved steadily nearby, its surface gray beneath the overcast sky. Cloaked figures gathered in clusters, their breath rising in pale clouds. The sound of leather creaking and the faint clink of chainmail carried across the field. It was June 15th, 1215, and the meadow of Runnymede was about to witness a moment that would echo through centuries. King John arrived with a grim expression, his cloak heavy, his eyes shadowed by sleepless nights. His reign had been marked by failure, lost lands in France, crushing taxes, and bitter disputes with the church. The barons who stood before him were not loyal subjects, but men who had risen in defiance, demanding limits on his power. Their armor was worn but serviceable, their banners muted in the damp air. They had forced this meeting, and John had little choice but to yield. At the center of the meadow, a wooden table had been set. Upon it lay parchment, ink, and wax. The Archbishop of Canterbury, Stephen Langton, acted as mediator, guiding the negotiations toward fragile peace. Scribes stood ready, quills poised, their hands stained with ink. The scratching of quills was faint but steady, a rhythm that marked the slow birth of a charter. The parchment was called the Magna Carta, the Great Charter. Its clauses were written in Latin, dense and formal, yet their meaning was clear. No free man was to be seized or imprisoned except by lawful judgment of his peers. The king could not impose taxes without the consent of his council. Even the church was granted freedom from royal interference. These were radical concessions, binding the crown to law. John's hand trembled slightly as he pressed his seal into the wax. It was not triumph, but surrender. His face remained pale, his jaw tight. For him, this was humiliation, a forced compromise with men who had risen against him. Yet for the barons, it was a victory, though fragile, for they knew the king's temper and his tendency to break promises. The charter contained 63 clauses, ranging from the protection of widows' rights to the regulation of fish weirs along rivers. Some were mundane, others profound. Together they formed a framework that echoed through centuries. Though annulled by the Pope within months, and though John himself sought to undo it, the Magna Carta was reissued in later years, its spirit enduring. Around them, the meadow carried ordinary details. Fires burned low in tents, smoke curling into the damp air. Bread and salted meat were eaten quickly, the meal simple, the mood tense. Horses shifted restlessly, stamping hooves into the soil. The architecture of their world was timber and stone, castles looming in the distance, churches rising with pointed arches. Against this backdrop, the Magna Carta was not a grand spectacle, but a quiet moment of negotiation. As evening fell, the meadow grew darker, the river's surface turning black beneath the fading light. The barons dispersed, their horses' hooves muffled in the damp soil. King John returned to his quarters, brooding, already plotting how to regain his authority. Yet the parchment remained, carried by scribes, copied and preserved. 4 exemplifications of the 1215 text survive today, housed in the British Library, Lincoln Castle, and Salisbury Cathedral. Their parchment is aged, their ink faded, yet they carry the weight of that day. The Magna Carta's immediate impact was limited. but its legacy grew. In later centuries, it was invoked by lawyers, reformers, and revolutionaries. It became a symbol of liberty, a foundation for constitutional government in England and beyond. The meadow of Runnymede still exists, its grass bending beneath the wind, its river flowing steadily past. Visitors walk its paths, imagining the scene of that day. The charter itself has become more than parchment and ink. It is remembered as the beginning of a principle that even kings must obey the law. The story of the Magna Carta is not one of sudden freedom, but of gradual change. The barons sought to protect their own rights, not to create democracy. Yet the clauses they forced upon King John became seeds that grew in unexpected ways. Centuries later, they were cited in the struggles of Parliament against monarchy, in the arguments of jurists shaping common law, and in the words of revolutionaries across the Atlantic. The meadow was quiet that evening in 1215, but the silence carried weight. The faint sound of the river, the rustle of cloaks, the creak of leather, all became part of a moment that endured. The Magna Carta was born not in triumph, but in compromise, not in grandeur, but in necessity. And yet from that necessity, a legacy was formed. The parchment spoke of justice, of limits, of order. It spoke of rights that could not be taken without judgment. It spoke of a crown bound by law. These words, written in Latin, carried through centuries, translated into principles that shaped nations. They became part of the foundation of constitutional government in England and beyond. King John did not intend to create such a legacy. He sought only to quiet rebellion, to buy time, to hold his throne. Yet history often grows from unintended acts. The seal pressed into wax that day became more than a mark of compromise. It became a symbol of restraint, of law above power. The meadow of Runnymede holds its quiet memory. The river still flows. The grass still bends beneath the wind. The moment lingers, not in grandeur, but in the steady rhythm of ink upon parchment, the press of a seal, the murmur of men seeking order in a restless land. A story of compromise, of power restrained, of law written into the soil of England. As the night settles, one can almost hear the faint echo of that day, the rustle of cloaks, the creak of leather, the solemn silence as history was sealed. The Magna Carta remains, not as parchment alone, but as a quiet reminder that even in the darkest of reigns, law can rise above power. And in that silence, the story endures, steady and calm, like the river flowing past Runnymede.